It's no secret that over the last couple of years, the price of short-term rentals in Medellin has been absolutely skyrocketing. Back in May this year, Fico Gutierrez, the mayor of Medellin, announced a widespread crackdown on illegal Airbnbs operating throughout the city, with further regulations coming in the following months. I'll get into exactly what he said a bit later in this video, but first we need to understand that this type of impending ban on Airbnbs is nothing new. Other cities have already tried this. One of the major cities being New York, but Berlin has already tried this. And Barcelona just announced this month that beginning in 2028, there will be no more Airbnbs operating in the city of Barcelona. So what does this mean? On paper, it looks like a pretty open and shut case. Airbnbs cause high rental prices, therefore we close Airbnbs and all the rental prices are going to come down. Simple, right? Let's do it. However, it's not that simple. A Harvard Business Review study actually found that banning Airbnbs might actually make things worse. And that's what I'm going to explore in today's video, so stay tuned. To understand this debate, let's get into the issue at hand, the rising rental prices in Medellin. Over the past 5-10 years, Medellin has become a booming international tourist destination. Last year, the city saw about 1.4 million international visitors, and that's up year on year since the pandemic. About 20 years ago, no one was coming here because it was super dangerous, but ever since, the security measures have increased and the Colombian government has invested more in promoting their country, tourism has flourished. So in this time, as tourism has increased, so has the rental prices of property in Medellin. This much is fact. No one can argue that. Many locals attribute the rising rental prices solely to the fact that there's more tourists and expats arriving in the city. Those that want to ban Airbnb are saying that the rise of Airbnb has resulted in lower supply of long-term apartments for locals, because the owners of these apartments, they'd rather rent it to a tourist, short-term rental, who can pay a lot more, rather than rent it long-term, say 12 months or 2-3 years, to a local who's obviously going to pay a lot less. But is banning Airbnb really going to solve all of Medellin's housing problems? As they say, the best predictor of the future is the past, so let's take a look at some of the other cities who have already tried these Airbnb bans, and let's see what effect they really have. So the first very well-known international city was Berlin back in 2014. The city put in place a rule that made it very, very difficult to rent out a property short-term without special permits. The idea was to keep more long-term housing options open for local residents instead of having them being converted into Airbnbs.
The city of Berlin has made it illegal for people living there to let entire homes to tourists through Airbnb and other short-stay renters. The crackdown is to protect affordable housing, as officials in the German capital say the letting boom has been driving up rents. If found breaking the law, which goes by the name of Zweckentfremdungsverbot, they can be fined up to 100,000 euros.
This ban immediately made a difference because some of the properties that were on Airbnb turned into local housing options and they went back on the market so that locals could rent them out. But not everyone was happy. Those people that were property owners immediately lost tons of income because now they weren't renting to short-term renters, they were renting at a much cheaper price to long-term local renters. So this went on for a few years until in 2018, Berlin actually loosened up these restrictions because they weren't working. There was too much backlash from the other side that didn't want Airbnbs banned. They finally settled on a rule that allowed homeowners to rent their properties out for no more than 90 days per year. They tried to find a middle ground that pleased everyone: the tourists, the property owners, and the local residents. 10 years later, Berlin still has problems. They are still dealing with housing affordability issues. So we can say in this case, banning Airbnb really didn't do much. Now let's look at a more recent example, much closer to home, New York City. Until recently, if you're going to New York City, you had two options, right? You were staying in an Airbnb or you're staying in a hotel. But in September 2023, the city actually started enforcing a law that was actually brought in back in 2022. And this law stated that you're not allowed to rent out your property for less than 30 days unless you are actually staying in the property yourself.
Starting today, short-term rental hosts in New York, they're going to have to register with the city and they have to comply with a new law that states you cannot rent out your entire apartment for less than 30 days, and hosts can only offer short-term rentals if they remain with their guests in the apartment. Hosts face fines of up to $5,000 per violation. City council members also say Airbnbs have raised rents in New York since they've taken all that inventory off the normal rental market.
So this rule came in effectively destroying short-term rentals. So what were the results? Let's take a look at that right now. Once again, I'm quoting from the Harvard Business Review article here. If you want to read this and go into more depth, then I've left all the links in the description. Research in New York City found that the presence of short-term rentals, such as those on Airbnb, contributes only a small portion to overall rental growth, only 1%. They also found that the presence of short-term rentals increases the annual rent of the median tenant by only $125. And the most interesting finding of all this is what happened to hotel prices. So if you know anything about economics, you know that usually if supply exceeds demand, then the prices are usually pretty good because you have all the people competing over a few clients. So they can't set whatever price they want. They actually need to win the client, so they need to make their prices cheaper. But now Airbnb wasn't in the picture anymore. So what did hotels do? Hotel prices went to the moon, with average rates soaring to $300 per night, because they no longer had the competition of Airbnb. The final findings of the article stated, overall, it's much more likely that the tight housing market in major cities is a bigger contributing factor to increases in annual rents than short-term rentals. So there's a whole list of other things that contribute to the rising prices, and Airbnb is not the major culprit. And I believe that's very much the case in Medellin as well. But let's go back and talk about what the mayor of Medellin, Fico, actually said about the impending ban on Airbnbs. He said, in buildings and family developments, the use of apartments or houses for short-term rentals where they engage in sexual exploitation and prostitution in our city and do not let neighbors live in peace will no longer be permitted. His main crackdown is for the short-term tourist who comes here and does irritating things, the things that piss off the local people. He wants to stamp that out so the local people can continue to live how they've always lived. One reporter actually asked him if he was seeking a complete ban on Airbnbs, and he responded, no, never. That would be an outrage. It's not about banning or ending Airbnb or other platforms, as some have tried to insinuate. Never. But we do have to sit down and work among all the actors in the city's tourism system on how we have to regulate ourselves so that this works and goes well. If you got any suggestions of what Medellin can do to combat this issue, then just leave it in the comments.